From the ashes of a wrestling business that had basically fallen on its proverbial ass in the early 90s, WWF was coasting on the reputation it had built on the backbone of the Rock and Wrestling Connection and Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage and the Ultimate Warrior. Hulk Hogan! They were struggling, and WCW was struggling so goddamn much that even when they had a bunch of great talent, no management could fix them because they basically had a bunch of idiots running the goddamn company. Jim Herd, a pizza guy. Fuck you, Jim Herd. I'm sorry you're still alive. But basically, ECW was meant to rise up like a goddamn phoenix in South Philadelphia with Todd Gordon running things, even though Todd Gordon would eventually be pushed out of the goddamn scene. So Paul Heyman, Paulie Dangerously, the man, the myth, the legend, the individual that took ECW to incredible heights for good and bad, but he absolutely understood what it meant to become Extreme Championship Wrestling! And this is its story, condensed. I'm John Rentham with my review of WWE on A&E Biography, WWE Legends on ECW. Okay, the ECW story has been done to death. Ever since, the rise and fall of ECW documentary, the One Night Stand pay-per-views, the relaunch of ECW by WWE, aka WWECW, and then, Forever Hardcore, the Jeremy Borash produced documentary, the Dark Side of the Ring episodes on Sandman, on New Jack, and no doubt they will do more on the ECW talents and everything. Look, ECW did have some great ideas and some great things that they did as far as impactful action. Jerry Lynn, RVD. It gave a platform to Mike Awesome as far as a U.S. platform, even though he had done well for himself in Japan for FMW before they fell on their goddamn ass. And yes, ECW did change the game as far as having basically more of a grunge look and a high impactful style and trying to make things more gritty and more real and everything. And there were good things in ECW. But let's not pretend that ECW was, this absolutely just tremendous promotion where a lot of bad didn't come from it as well. And I'm not saying it's the only promotion in the 90s where bad shit happened. But goddamn it, some people have rose-tinted asses. I think that's the same as far as ECW. Now, if you love ECW, that's fine. That's cool. I'm not knocking you guys one bit. But this isn't going to change anyone's minds. It's just going to give basically a cheesy clip show edition of ECW. Now, they did have some cool behind-the-scenes footage from house shows, from television tapings, from even their first pay-per-view. There was a little bit of new footage, but it was also only a goddamn hour. So no, I'm not going to, talk about every single thing that I did or didn't like in ECW. Those videos are out there. I stand by everything I said. And also, yes, Heyman got a lot out of a roster that not a lot of people would have been able to. And Heyman did it better than anyone else as far as the extreme violence and, the gritty realism and all that. But some of the angles didn't really work all that well because Heyman had ideas, but he never really had a way to go where things would finish. The Beulah McGillicuddy being pregnant thing and all that and whatever. But they did some good stuff. So, yeah, we show up at Philly for Mania 40. ECW memorabilia at their Access event. And then 2002 Heyman footage where ECW's realism and everything, it's been, it was felt throughout the industry. The talking heads, same as it ever was, at least the ones that are still alive. See, because that's another thing, and this is the last thing I'll get, before I get off my high horse, plenty of promoters rode their talents into the goddamn ground. But you can't tell me that Heyman basically being almost a Jim Jones-like cult leader, and that's basically what he was. I believe somebody called him the David Koresh of professional wrestling, or maybe that was what Heyman called Raven. I can't really necessarily remember all that, but it was certainly a choice of words. That being said, Heyman would get talents to do a whole lot of stuff from Buster Buys up, and no wonder everybody ended up on a bunch of pills with a bunch of injuries that they either couldn't get taken care of or substance abuse issues that got worse, or basically people that ended up in such a goddamn bad state that they either died early or they're in a vegetative state or they're basically, there's very few that are still alive and have at least some of their faculties about them. Taz and the Dudleys are probably about the only, well, maybe not Bubba so much, given some of his ideas when he booked Ring of Honor. I digress. Heyman does shoulder a lot of the blame for the injuries that piled up on his roster. Yes, it's a high-impact sport as far as professional wrestling goes, but don't tell me that he wasn't the mastermind that ended up basically leading to bleeding a lot of talents dry. And look what they did. Did they have people against them? Sure. Were they doing some great things? Sure. Were there people that probably could have been more financially supportive of them? Sure. But then you show a little bit of restraint. And maybe you don't ask people to go through 3 or 4 goddamn tables because there's no fucking way to follow up on it. Anyway, talking heads. Heyman, Dudleys, Foley, Sandman, Austin, Sam Roberts, Yay, RVD, Lita, Spike Dudley. It was nice to see Spike Dudley there. He still seems to be doing well. Heyman in AWA's Paulie Dangerously was kind of hilarious. They did put some of the 2014 Heyman interview footage from his My Name is Paul Heyman documentary, which you might as well watch that because it's a better encapsulation of ECW than this. But the Dangerous Alliance, and yeah, Heyman will never be able to talk about who led to him getting fired and, you know, the lawsuit and the hush money and everything. It was Bill Watts. Pretty certain it was Bill Watts. I don't know who else it would be given the time, given the time frame and everything. And yeah, Bill Watts, for all his genius, did have his demons. Maybe still does. I think actually Bill Watts is still alive. But nevertheless, ECW was like Fight Club. Makes sense. Footage, they kind of mixed in the footage from 93 to 99. They would jump back and forth, back and forth. You see Doink getting choke slammed by 911. And, yeah, the branding iron stuff, the barbed wire ropes, the weapons, all the bullshit. ECW was a cult. Yeah, and like some cults or whatever, they bought into it a little bit too much. I'm not saying the fans, like some of the fans that talk to me, but if you liked it, great. For the kind of thing that people like, that's the kind of thing they like. I mean, that's not exactly, a perfect quote, but you get the whole thing. And behind the scenes, backstage footage, that was kind of cool to see how it was edited in, someone's basement. There were 2 cameramen. They basically they couldn't go with the big production values. They didn't have the budget, even though Heyman had a lot of money from his settlement rather than WCW. His parents, I believe, became investors. I think his mom might have. And yeah, they did some good stuff. Dreamer, I wonder what bullshit he'll say, like, what he said in the Plane Ride from Hell episode about that, poor flight attendant. Yeah, that fucking piece of shit. And I'm not saying that Ric Flair did was a lot worse, but Dreamer certainly exposed his whole goddamn ass, which he's known to do because he's still having to wrestle because he doesn't have any other discernible talent. So yeah, Austin got his boost in ECW. That was kind of cool to see. Yeah, funny about Dreamer, though. I just want to go back there. That guy actually was one of the most over people in ECW, and even to an extent in WWE for a little bit. But he just didn't know when to let go. And has basically become a shell of what he was even in 2009 when he could barely move even then. So the ECW arena, it was just a small place, bingo hall and everything. And they dressed it up to make it look gritty, and they also used it for the first ever pay-per-view that they had. ECW did help elevate how companies should, take things a little more to the extreme, but with a little more control because they had the bigger budgets. And Taker talked about how fanatical the fans were. I mean, yes, that is a term of fanatical. The Spike Dudley crowd surfing thing when Bam Bam Bigelow threw him into the crowd. The crowd was a star of its own. That's another big problem of ECW, even though the crowd was a big part of it. And the crowds, Gain Electric, were great. Great, as far as visual, great as far as sound and everything, great as far as just drawing you into the show. The fans saw themselves just as much of a star as they saw the wrestlers as stars. And that's where things become an issue. There's a separation of wrestlers and fans. And sometimes I think people forget about that. And then they do the Terry Funk, chair throwing thing. Stop throwing the fucking chairs. The 2012 footage from, Funko, what craziness in ECW. We encourage audience participation, and maybe a little bit too much. Joey Styles says, you think, Joey, you think, you crackpot. And all the injuries for little to no pay, that's one thing they really didn't bother to talk about. Cornette did get a couple lines in from when they interviewed him back in like 2017 or something like that. We're setting an impossible, we're saying a physical standard that's basically impossible to live up to, which he's right. Because that's the thing, if you go through a table, okay, next show, you go through a table, it doesn't have the same impact, so you gotta go through 2 tables. And then you gotta throw ladders in the goddamn ring. And then you gotta have 911 chokeslam Dreamer off some goddamn tables off a balcony and everything. Or New Jack's gotta jump off of a 15-foot, partition. Or he's gotta basically smash his brain because Vic Grimes, that fat goddamn piece of shit that he deserves to rot, not just for that, but just for being a goddamn uncoordinated, motherfucking piece of shit in wrestling that never deserved to be there. I mean, take a look at him. Look at the state of him even in his prime. His mother must have just said, my God, I have sharded out a goddamn boiled egg. So anyway, yeah, New Jack, rest in peace, New Jack. Because at least New Jack bit in ECW. They couldn't get on pay-per-view in 95 because they were seen as like UFC. They were labeled there because they were extreme and all that. And every single day it was a battle of survival, and every single day that we survived was a miracle. In Your House Mind Games 96, they talked about how Vince needed a boost. I believe it was the King of the Ring where Mabel was won the King of the Ring. That was a great idea. Mabel, I mean, a nice guy, but just should have never been King of the Ring. ECW chants were happening then Philadelphia in 96, September 96. Same night where Mankind and Shawn Michaels had a great main event match. Sid and Vader showed up and did a whole bunch of shit. And Taker popped out of a casket and we had everything. I think Paul Bearer even decided to swing a chair at one point, as hilarious as that would have been. But that was where, things became an exposure, or things got to where ECW was exposed. It got buzz, ECW on Raw. They got on pay-per-view, barely legal. 100,000 pay-per-view buys, which was a big goddamn deal. It was cool to see Terry Funk backstage, winning the championship. And they didn't talk about how ECW basically was a feeder system for the bigger companies, because even though Heyman wanted ECW to succeed, he didn't have the pocketbook. And also, where they were paying to be on these channels or not, where they were doing all this, the bills were piling up because Paul Heyman was a terrible businessman. And that is one thing that needs to be remembered. In addition to the fact that he ruined the lives of a lot of wrestlers. Chris Candido lost his goddamn house because of all things that were going on. And yes, there were some towns that weren't owed money by Heyman. But then they were owed money. Somebody like RVD was owed a lot of goddamn money. And yeah, Heyman should have been able to pay them, and if he actually had any financial, stability or any ability to control money, he would have been able to do that. Yes, ECW and TNN, which became Spike TV, was a big deal, but the thing is ECW by that point, even with up production values, had no talent. Because the Dudleys left, Taz wanted to leave because he wanted another challenge, and they had people, but they didn't have enough. I mean, take a look at the roster of ECW in the fall of 1999. They didn't have enough. It killed ECW. They were having to pay for everything. I'm not saying the TNN necessarily was, the most supportive of ECW. They probably just ran it there just to see if wrestling would fly, and then they would sign Vince McMahon because Vince McMahon wanted to leave USA. And did leave USA. That's the narrative that a lot of people forget is, Raw was off USA well before this whole impending Netflix deal is going to happen. They were off USA for 5 fucking years. So, Callis, the renowned, alleged, individual that led to the exit of Scarlett and Killer Cross, from Impact, and I'm sure is just absolutely sitting outside the goddamn women's locker room, rubbing his hands together and everything, and Khan looks the other way. Joey Styles, the crackpot, was on commentary. Joey Styles calling the action as an individual commentator. Really, really good. Don't get me wrong, but he's nuts. And not in a good way. And yeah, TNN got rid of them because they got Raw in 2000, like late 2000. I think it was September 25th, 2000. They say it was a week week after ECW was off TNN. I thought it was a few weeks. And basically Vince had a meeting with Heyman, and Heyman basically said, you know, like, Vince is like, is there anything I can do? Well, you can give me $500,000 as a loan to help us. We can put on pay-per-views and hopefully get another TV deal. And they got it. And evidently that went to credit or that went to something or whatever. That $500,000 didn't carry him very far. I don't know what the cost is when it comes to, you know, running a wrestling company. Obviously, I just work my job and I do whatever, but that's the whole point, is you need to be smarter with your money. The RVD episode, by the way, is next week. If that is 2 hours, I will review it. If it's an hour, I'm probably not going to review it. Guilty as Charged 2001 was their last pay-per-view. They were going to have Living Dangerously 2001, but that didn't happen because the pay-per-view companies were screwing them over. Again, so they said, I mean, I've heard that Heyman wasn't necessarily great at honoring the contract with the pay-per-view company, and there were, you know, whatever pay-per-view company was running, and there were times where pay-per-views were having issues airing. They had two more house shows. I think one was in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. I think that might have been the last one. That was it. ECW wasn't going to survive even if it got back on TV. There was no way, because things were changing and they were moving away from the impactful style and the extreme stuff, and they would have to tone things down. I'm not saying the ECW wouldn't have survived for a few years, but it would not. Heyman has these lofty things like he would have been, oh, the CEO and his $1 billion stock option and all that. Okay, no, it's better that he's in WWE, at least the couple stints he had. The alliance, it was bad. It was really bad, the whole WCW-ECW alliance. Heyman's Hall of Fame induction, and the ECW wall at the arena. And look, that's the legacy of ECW. It is something where great things did happen. There were great matches that happened. There were great moments that happened. And then there was some bullshit that cannot be fucking ignored. All the stuff that Heyman did, the fact that there was no way to follow up on a lot of the shit they did. And it got to where even they were too big to be small, they were too small to be big. That's the legacy of ECW. But it's a legacy that people still appreciate and love. And I love the good stuff. Don't get me wrong. But there's a lot of bad stuff that cannot and will never be ignored by me and others. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Rentlin. I'll see you soon.